It is really important that you understand how navigation works behind the scenes. In an Angular Ionic app, we use the Angular router for navigation. And that is what you also already saw in the previous modules. We set up our routes in our Angular router configuration just as we do it in a normal Angular app. And as I emphasized multiple times, this is just a normal Angular app. But we use that router for setting up the routes, and then we can use the router link or the navigate method when we inject the router to switch between our different paths and therefore the different pages. Now here comes the interesting part when using the Angular router in an Ionic app. Because this Ionic app with the @Angular Ionic package actually kind of wraps that Angular routing functionality. And you can tell that it does by the fact that we use this ion router outlet, if you remember. It does so to basically add all these nice transitions. That's the main purpose. And for that, Ionic thinks of navigation or the different pages as a stack of pages. Because if you think about a mobile app, you typically see one page at a time, right? And you can go to a new page or press the back button and go back. Well, you can essentially do the same in the browser, of course. There you also have a back button. So you can think of navigation as a stack of pages, and you always view the page which is on top of this stack. So the topmost page, that is the page you see. But the other pages are still there, just hidden, so to say. And when you go back, you basically pop that top page and you see the other pages. Ionic controls this stack of pages with a stack controller. Now, that's a class you don't work with directly in your Angular app. Ionic does that for you, so it's internal to Ionic. And as I mentioned, when you use the Angular router for navigating, Ionic basically watches the Angular router. It has a listener to your routing actions. When you go forward, it basically pushes a new page onto that stack. And when you go back, or use that ion back button, it pops that topmost page off. Now, in case you're wondering how it knows whether a navigate call is meant to go forward or backward, it basically has a look at the internal ID of your navigation action, and it turns out that by that ID you can determine whether the new route is basically one step ahead of the old route or behind it, so to say. So you don't have to worry about that. Ionic is really smart about finding out if you're going forward or backward. And that in turn is important for playing the right animation for transitioning from pages. Now this stack of pages, and that's also something special Ionic does, is then also cached for you. And that is now a difference to your normal Angular for web in browser experience. There, what happens is if you go to a new page and you go back, all these pages, which in the end are just components, are essentially destroyed when you leave them, no matter if you're going forward or backward. Now with Ionic, that's actually not the case. When you're going forward to a new page, that old page, which is still on that stack of pages, so to say, is kept in a cache in memory. So this whole stack of pages is actually cached, you could say. And when you pop a page off, well, then this is removed from the cache because it's removed from the stack. This will become important, and will also explain that little bug we had in our last modules, which I'll fix now, or which I'll now explain you why it happens. Now, besides the Angular router for navigating around, which we'll primarily use and which is the main recommended tool for going around in your Ionic Angular app, besides that, we also got the Ionic nav controller. That is an injectable service which you can inject into any component or a service you might have. And that essentially gives you some utility methods that will also interact with that stack controller. For example, it will give you a pop method, which allows you to manually pop off the latest page on the stack of pages, and which will therefore trigger a back navigation. We'll not use the nav controller too much. Still, I will show it to you. It's good to know it's there, can help you with going back, as I mentioned, but primarily we'll use the Angular router.